doing. I had no idea.
No idea what you were
doing.
doing. No, you were just being you and go, I didn't know. I didn't start this rumor. Yeah.
I didn't.
When does Snow White come out? After multiple delays and nearly 2 years of uncertainty, the long-awaited release is finally drawing closer, but not without controversy. What was once expected to be one of Disney's safest and most nostalgic remakes has turned into a lightning rod for online outrage, fan disappointment, and industry skepticism. Many now believe this project, meant to honor the film that started it all, could become one of Disney's biggest missteps in decades. There was a time when a Disney movie felt like pure magic. The moment the castle appeared on screen, you were transported somewhere else. A place where love was real, dreams came true, and the impossible felt possible. For generations, that unmistakable spark defined the company's legacy. It made children believe in fairy tales, and adults believe, even if just for a moment, in something bigger than reality. But somewhere along the way, that spark began to flicker. The magic that once united audiences now seems to divide them. Now, all eyes are on Snow White, the remake of Disney's very first animated feature. The film that built the entire empire of talking animals, singing princesses, and happy endings. It should have been a guaranteed hit, a love letter to the movie that started the dream. Instead, it's become one of the most polarizing productions Disney has ever attempted. The controversy began with the casting of Rachel Zegler. On paper, it sounded like the perfect modern choice. A talented young actress with critical acclaim and a growing fan base, reimagining a classic role for a new generation. But what looked good in the boardroom didn't sit well with millions of lifelong Disney fans. In the original 1937 fairy tale, Snow White is described as having skin as white as snow, the very trait that inspired her name. It's not a trivial detail. It's a defining part of the story's symbolism and identity. So, when Disney announced that a Latina actress had been chosen for the role, the internet erupted. Some called it progressive, a refreshing update for a modern, inclusive audience. Others accused Disney of chasing woke points, arguing the studio was rewriting heritage for the sake of optics. Disney defended the choice as a step toward broader representation, claiming their goal was to reimagine classic stories for today's world. But the debate only intensified. Fans were split down the middle, those excited for change versus those who saw it as an unnecessary overhaul of a treasured icon. The discussion flooded social media feeds, YouTube comment sections, and entertainment podcasts for weeks. And that was just the beginning. As filming details began to leak, audiences realized that Snow White wasn't just getting a new face, the entire heart of the story was being rewritten. Early reports revealed that the romantic subplot, once the emotional core of the original, had been labeled outdated and problematic by modern standards. The prince, one of the story's most beloved characters, was rumored to be drastically reduced or removed altogether. For fans who grew up believing in "someday my prince will come," this was nothing short of heartbreaking. Without the prince's love story, they asked, what's left of the fairy tale that defined Disney's very brand of romance? What message replaces the dream that launched 1,000 stories? Then came another revelation, perhaps even more shocking. The Seven Dwarfs, some of the most iconic and beloved side characters in film history, were nowhere to be found. Early set photos hinted at a complete reimagining of the group, a mix of variously sized actors, some human, some CGI, and reportedly, not even dwarfs at all. The decision came after actor Peter Dinklage publicly criticized the concept of remaking Snow White with the traditional depiction of dwarfs, calling it outdated and offensive. Disney appeared to take his comments to heart, but fans felt something precious had been lost in translation. The dwarfs weren't just comic relief, they were the emotional foundation of the story. They represented kindness, community, and friendship. They were the family Snow White found when she had nowhere else to go. Without them, the film risks losing the very soul that made the original so moving and memorable. Soon, every creative change, from costume redesigns to script rewrites, became a new headline. Leaked comments from Rachel Zegler added more fuel to the fire, as her outspoken interviews about the dated themes of the original story drew criticism from fans who felt she was disrespecting the role she'd been chosen to play. Each quote went viral, spawning countless TikToks, reaction videos, and YouTube breakdowns dissecting every word she said. What was meant to be a simple remake had spiraled into a full-blown public relations disaster. Disney found itself caught between two worlds, one demanding progress and representation, and another begging the company not to abandon its classic magic in the process. So now, as the release date finally approaches, the question isn't just when Snow White will come out, it's whether it can survive its own controversy. Can a story that once symbolized innocence and wonder still work in a time of online outrage and divided audiences? Or has Disney's attempt to modernize its oldest fairy tale backfired beyond repair? For nearly a century, Snow White was the film that built the dream. But in 2025, that dream may be tested like never before. All these changes left fans wondering if the upcoming film would be Snow White in name only. The heart, the innocence, the magic. It all seemed to be slipping away. But things truly exploded when the behind-the-scenes interviews began surfacing. That's where Rachel Zegler, the film's leading actress, unintentionally lit the fuse that set the controversy ablaze. Across multiple press clips and red carpet moments, Zegler came across as dismissive of the original 1937 classic. In one interview, she openly joked about Snow White's love story, calling it outdated and irrelevant for modern audiences. In another, she bluntly stated that this remake wouldn't feature a traditional romance because, as she put it, Snow White didn't need a man to save her. She laughed about on-set details that referenced the original, like apple-flavored snacks and nods to the prince, treating them as silly relics of a bygone era. The message that many fans took away was clear. She didn't seem to respect the film that built Disney's legacy. For millions who grew up enchanted by that story, who saw Snow White not as a passive princess, but as a symbol of kindness and purity, her tone felt like a betrayal. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. The sarcasm, the smirks, the laughter. It all came across as if she was mocking the very magic she'd been entrusted to represent. Social media erupted almost instantly. TikTok edits, reaction videos, and YouTube breakdowns flooded every platform, dissecting her words frame by frame. Fans accused her of canceling the essence of Snow White, while others said she acted like she was ashamed to be part of something so innocent and old-fashioned. Entire comment sections filled with anger and disbelief, not only at Zegler's remarks, but at Disney itself for allowing such a dismissive attitude toward its own cornerstone story. Critics were quick to label her comments as tone-deaf and condescending. Memes circulated comparing her interviews to a corporate crash course in how not to promote a beloved remake. Each new quote made the situation worse, painting a picture of an actress, and perhaps a studio, more interested in moral signaling than storytelling. But the backlash didn't stop there. It caught the attention of one of pop culture's most fearless satirists, South Park. In a now viral episode titled The Panderers, the show took direct aim at Hollywood's growing obsession with inclusive reboots. The episode mocked the industry's habit of flipping classic characters purely for social points, poking fun at the idea that many modern remakes exist more to appease online discourse than to tell a meaningful story. Naturally, Disney was in the crosshairs. The writers portrayed the company as a creative giant that had lost touch with the very magic that once made it great, turning every production into a political statement, rather than a piece of timeless entertainment. In true South Park fashion, the satire was brutal, exaggerated, and unapologetic, yet it struck a chord. Viewers couldn't help but notice how eerily it mirrored the Snow White controversy. The parallels were unmistakable. The casting uproar, the corporate spin, and the sense that studios were more focused on virtue signaling than storytelling. Through humor, South Park asked a question many fans were already thinking. Did Disney still care about meaningful representation, or was it just chasing applause on social media? Meanwhile, Rachel Zegler's interviews continued making the rounds. Some media outlets tried to soften the narrative, suggesting she was simply misunderstood, an outspoken young actress navigating a tricky publicity storm. Others were far less forgiving, accusing her of arrogance and disrespect toward the film's legacy. But by then, the damage was done. The controversy had taken on a life of its own, overshadowing nearly every conversation about the movie itself. Instead of discussing the visuals, the music, or how the story might connect with a new generation, the entire debate had shifted to whether Disney had lost touch with its own identity, and whether Zegler, knowingly or not, had become the face of that disconnect. For many fans, Snow White had once symbolized everything that made Disney magical: purity, hope, and the belief that goodness always prevails.
Hi. Hold on, my phone's falling. I had the best day, just the best. Nico?
But in this modern retelling, that magic seemed to have been replaced with irony, cynicism, and a corporate message about empowerment that rang hollow. What was meant to be a revival of the studio's oldest dream had become a cautionary tale of how easily that dream can unravel in the age of viral outrage. Fans who adored the 1937 classic accused Disney of throwing nostalgia out the window. For them, Snow White wasn't just another princess movie, it was the genesis of Disney's entire identity. The film had defined innocence, imagination, and moral clarity for generations. Watching the remake strip away the story's fundamental pieces felt, to many, like watching a legacy being rewritten in real time. On the other hand, some defended the changes. They argued it was time to move beyond outdated tropes. That removing the prince and reimagining the seven dwarfs wasn't an attack on the past, but an attempt to modernize the narrative. In their view, this was a new era for Disney, one that could reframe classic fairy tales through a contemporary lens of independence and empowerment. But critics weren't convinced. They asked the obvious questions. Isn't Snow White's entire premise built around her bond with the seven outcasts who become her family? Isn't the prince supposed to symbolize the idea that genuine kindness can lead to a happily ever after? And isn't the queen's obsession with vanity meant to contrast Snow White's purity and humility, the central moral lesson of the entire story? Without those elements, skeptics wondered, what would be left? Would audiences even be watching Snow White anymore, or just a new fantasy movie wearing the old name? Disney tried to control the growing backlash, knowing the stakes couldn't be higher. Snow White isn't just any fairy tale, it's the cornerstone of the entire Disney legacy. The 1937 original was not only the first Disney princess film, but also the first full-length animated feature in history. It paved the way for everything that followed: Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, The Little Mermaid, and the empire of dreams that shaped modern animation. For Disney, Snow White was sacred ground. Yet balancing brand loyalty with modern values has become one of the company's toughest challenges. With every new remake, from The Little Mermaid to Pinocchio, Disney finds itself walking the same tightrope between nostalgia and progress. Some audiences applaud their efforts to make stories more inclusive and relevant. Others see these remakes as hollow imitations, stripped of the heart that once made them special. But Snow White, perhaps more than any other, carried an expectation of reverence. An unspoken rule that this particular fairy tale was not to be tampered with. As the debate deepened, a larger question emerged. Has Disney become so determined to fix the past that it's forgotten what made its stories timeless? Romance, once considered a symbol of hope, is now dismissed as problematic. Comedic sidekicks are rewritten or erased to avoid offending anyone. And every new protagonist seems to carry a checklist of empowerment messages that feel more corporate than heartfelt. True empowerment, many fans argued, doesn't come from tearing down tradition. It comes from breathing new life into it without losing its soul. You can modernize a story without hollowing it out. You can evolve a character without mocking the past. But the Snow White remake, critics said, seemed to be doing the opposite. And then came Rachel Zegler's personal PR disaster, the gasoline on an already blazing fire. Every time she spoke, the controversy grew. Fans replayed interviews where she dismissed the prince as unnecessary and described the original story as creepy or weird. To her supporters, she was simply being candid, a young actress unafraid to voice her opinions. To her detractors, she was belittling the very fans who cared about the film's history. At one point, rumors spread that she had demanded higher compensation for wearing the Snow White costume, a claim that, true or not, struck the wrong chord with viewers already skeptical of her attitude. On one hand, an actress negotiating fair pay is normal. On the other, her tone in interviews often came across as flippant, even mocking, as though she resented the legacy that had given her this career-defining role. Fans began drawing comparisons. They pointed out how Emma Watson approached Beauty and the Beast, modernizing Belle's independence while still honoring her warmth and intelligence. Others mentioned Halle Bailey's Little Mermaid, praising how she reinterpreted Ariel without ever disrespecting the original's emotional spirit. In contrast, Zegler's portrayal, at least in the public eye, seemed to reject the essence of Snow White altogether. Whether that was her intent or not, the perception was clear. She didn't seem to appreciate the story that had made her famous. But that raised another question, one that went beyond Zegler herself. Why did Disney allow it to continue? Major studios carefully script every interview, every soundbite, every promotional message. Nothing goes public without being approved, rehearsed, and vetted. So how did Disney's PR machine lose control of one of its most important films? How did a movie meant to celebrate the company's greatest legacy turn into its biggest marketing nightmare? By the time the damage was done, the conversation around Snow White wasn't about the film's cinematography, its music, or its message. It had become a cultural battlefield, a symbol of what many see as Hollywood's identity crisis. For some, Disney was evolving. For others, it was erasing history. But for everyone watching, one thing was certain. The fairy tale that once defined innocence had become a lightning rod for controversy in an age where even magic itself has to pass a public relations test. Did Disney underestimate how fiercely people cling to their fairy tale nostalgia? Or did they overestimate the public's appetite for radical rewrites of beloved stories? Whatever the miscalculation, the result has been deafening and overwhelmingly negative. What was supposed to be a crown jewel of Disney's live-action revival slate has instead become a PR storm that even the studio's most polished marketing team can't seem to contain. Every new promotional beat has been met with skepticism. Each interview, each still image, each leaked clip only adds to the noise. Industry insiders whisper that Disney now faces the possibility of a brutal loss, not just financial, but reputational. Entertainment media outlets have tried to soften the narrative, offering excuses and spinning talking points about creative evolution and bold new vision. Yet fans aren't buying it. As the release date kept being pushed further and further away, speculation swirled. Some suspected Disney was stalling, buying time to rethink, re-edit, or quietly pivot the film's direction. A few even believed the company might shelve the project entirely if the backlash didn't cool off. Still, official statements remained upbeat, painting the new Snow White as a progressive step forward for a new generation of dreamers. But sharp-eyed fans noticed the cracks. In leaked set photos, certain iconic elements were missing. No prince, no dwarfs, and no sign of the classic whimsy that once defined the story. Instead, the dwarfs had been replaced by a strangely assorted group of companions, a choice that quickly became another flashpoint for criticism. To many, it felt like the studio had traded beloved comedic charm for corporate-approved messaging. The very elements that made the story joyful and human, laughter, innocence, friendship, now seemed filtered through a lens of careful modern politics. Then came the comedic gut punch from South Park. In their characteristically ruthless style, the creators released an episode titled The Panderers, which tore into Hollywood's obsession with diversity-driven remakes. The parody imagined a world where every classic hero or heroine was reimagined as an adult woman of color, repeating slogans about patriarchy and oppression. It was deliberately over the top, but the message cut deep. Through absurd humor, South Park laid bare a growing audience fatigue, not with diversity itself, but with the performance of it. When representation feels more like pandering than storytelling, it loses its power. Audiences immediately drew the comparison. Across social media, fans pointed to Snow White as the exact scenario the show was mocking. Memes, reaction videos, and commentary flooded timelines, turning Disney's once revered brand into the butt of a cultural joke. But beneath the humor was something more serious, a sense of betrayal. Viewers weren't rejecting progress, they were rejecting the feeling that Hollywood had forgotten sincerity.
I think she would do really well. Basically, she did do that in our movie.
I feel like what you do in the movie is exactly what I'm.
For decades, people turned to Disney for timeless moral lessons. Kindness over cruelty, humility over vanity, courage over fear. But now, those lessons seemed buried under corporate messaging, sanitized scripts, and boardroom-approved empowerment lines. It wasn't about what was changing, it was why. Fans could sense when a story was being reimagined with heart, and when it was being rewritten to chase headlines. Rachel Zegler's public comments only added fuel to the fire. Clips circulated online where she joked about the prince being a stalker and mocked the romantic core of the original story. "Say it louder so your other eye can hear you." One viral meme quoted her sarcastically, twisting her own words back at her. To critics, her remarks weren't just casual, they were dismissive of everything that made Snow White resonate in the first place. People began digging deeper into her social media history, finding other comments they labeled arrogant or self-righteous. Soon, what could have been a story about creative reinvention turned into a referendum on Zegler herself. In the eyes of many, she had become the symbol of Hollywood's disconnect. An actress seemingly unaware of how deeply audiences loved the original story, and how personally they took its reimagining. The frustration wasn't simply about a movie anymore, it was about what Snow White represented. A clash between generations, between nostalgia and progress, between authenticity and corporate posturing. The fairy tale that once stood for innocence and purity had become the centerpiece of a culture war about the future of storytelling. Adding to the tension were the financial rumors swirling inside Burbank. In recent years, Disney's live-action remakes have struggled to match their animated predecessors. While films like The Little Mermaid and Pinocchio managed modest profits after streaming deals, their theatrical runs were underwhelming. Executives quietly worried that Snow White, with its enormous budget and mounting backlash, could end up as one of the studio's costliest disappointments yet. Behind closed doors, analysts whispered that this wasn't just another box office gamble, it was a test of Disney's entire modern philosophy. Could the company continue reshaping its classics for a new era without alienating the audiences that built its empire? Or had the world's most magical studio finally forgotten the one rule that made it great? That true magic can't be manufactured in a boardroom? Snow White was supposed to be a safe bet, a sure thing in Disney's ever-expanding catalog of live-action remakes. This was the fairy tale that started it all, the foundation on which Disney built its empire. The very idea that Snow White could fail seemed almost unthinkable. For decades, she symbolized innocence, hope, and the timeless magic that defined family entertainment. Yet, as one controversy after another piled up, what once looked like a guaranteed success began to feel like a slow-moving disaster. Fans who grew up cherishing the story started warning that this reimagined version might not just stumble, it could outright collapse. It's worth noting, though, that not everyone is rooting for failure. There's still a quiet, hopeful corner of the audience that believes Snow White could surprise everyone. These viewers argue that we've seen this story before. Backlash before release, cautious optimism afterward, and then a strong box office recovery. Some remember how people doubted The Little Mermaid remake or Aladdin, both of which went on to pull respectable numbers despite early skepticism. Maybe, they suggest, there's a silent majority out there. People who haven't joined the online shouting match, who are waiting to judge the film on its own merits when the lights dim and the opening credits roll. But that optimism has struggled to cut through the noise. Every new headline about Rachel Zegler's interviews, every clip dissected on social media, every viral meme has reinforced the sense that Disney may have drifted far from its Magic Kingdom roots. The narrative has turned less about the film itself and more about what it represents. The tension between nostalgia and progress, artistry and activism, sincerity and strategy. And so the deeper question emerges, what happens when nostalgia collides with corporate-driven progress? Can a century-old story be reshaped for a new world without losing its heart? Or are we watching the slow erosion of something that once felt pure? In today's Hollywood, even actors have little control over the process. As an actor, you don't get to dictate anything, one insider observed. You don't decide if a film happens, when it's shot, or how it's shaped. But those creative constraints have real consequences. When every classic gets retrofitted to fit a new cultural script, it risks stripping away the timeless qualities that made it beloved in the first place. The Snow White controversy, more than any other Disney remake before it, has become a mirror reflecting the cultural anxiety of the moment. It's not just about one film. It's about the entire philosophy behind how these stories are retold. The debate isn't about whether representation belongs in fairy tales. It absolutely does. But whether that representation feels earned or engineered, audiences have made one thing clear. They're open to change, even hungry for it, but not when that change feels hollow. They'll embrace new voices and modern updates, but not if it means tearing out the emotional core that made the story universal. Snow White has become the flashpoint in that discussion, a case study in how far Hollywood can push reinvention before audiences push back. It's especially ironic because this film could have been something special. The enduring affection for the 1937 classic, paired with today's demand for inclusivity and empowerment, could have created a powerful, resonant blend. A bridge between generations. The potential was enormous. But instead of harmony, what we've seen is friction. A studio and a star seemingly out of sync with the very audience they're trying to win over. Each interview, each defensive statement, each dismissive quip has fanned the flames instead of calming them. Now, Snow White's future hangs in a precarious balance between redemption and disaster. Some viewers cling to cautious optimism, hoping that once the full movie is unveiled, it might surprise the skeptics and deliver a heartfelt modern fairy tale. Others, however, are convinced it's already too late, that it will serve as another cautionary tale of how not to update a legend. Rachel Zegler herself once admitted she was scared of the original cartoon, recalling how she watched it only once as a child and never again. For some, that comment underscored the entire problem. The sense that those entrusted with preserving these cultural treasures don't truly love them. To critics, that fear wasn't just about a film, it was symbolic of a generation of storytellers who've lost touch with the emotional DNA of the tales they're rewriting. If Snow White fails, it won't just be a box office misfire, it'll mark a cultural turning point. A moment when audiences finally said, enough. Enough of remakes that confuse reinvention with replacement. Enough of studios that chase trends instead of timeless truths. Whether Disney learns from this moment or doubles down will shape not just the fate of one film, but the future of its entire brand. Because in the end, fairy tales survive not through marketing or modernity, but through the magic that makes us believe, again and again, that something beautiful can still happen when the story begins with once upon a time. Either way, the fascination surrounding this film, whether fueled by genuine curiosity, sheer disbelief, or lifelong fandom, is undeniable. In that sense, maybe Disney's strategy worked. Good or bad, everyone is talking about Snow White. But if all that chatter ends in a box office catastrophe, the conversation won't matter. In a world where studios chase trends, hashtags, and headlines more than heart, attention isn't the same as admiration. And as South Park so bluntly satirized, when you try too hard to please everyone, you risk creating something that pleases no one at all. If there's a moral to this modern-day Snow White saga, it's this. When you reinterpret a beloved classic, never lose sight of what made it beloved in the first place. True diversity, genuine empowerment, and creative evolution can absolutely coexist with the essence of a fairy tale, but only if the people behind it care about the story as much as the spotlight. Sincerity can't be faked, and audiences can always tell when it's missing. Whether this Snow White becomes a cautionary footnote or a remarkable redemption arc remains to be seen. But one truth lingers like an echo through Disney's golden past. The magic that made the studio iconic was never about marketing. It was about sincerity, warmth, and emotional connection. The kind of magic that made you believe that once upon a time could lead to happily ever after. Replace that sincerity with corporate pandering, and the illusion collapses. Because controversy might fuel clicks, but it doesn't fill theaters. It doesn't spark imagination. And it certainly doesn't create magic. So perhaps the real question isn't whether Snow White will succeed financially, but whether Disney still believes in happily ever afters at all. Or has the company become so consumed by modern cynicism that it's forgotten the wonder that built its empire? Every time the studio bends a classic to fit the latest cultural mold, it risks snapping the very spirit that made these tales endure. The story of Snow White once taught generations about kindness, friendship, courage, and love. Now, it's teaching us something else. The danger of bending a beloved story so far that it breaks. Will Disney course correct and rediscover the heart that made its stories timeless? Or will this be remembered as the moment even fairy tale magic couldn't survive the weight of modern reinvention? Because in the end, messing with the soul of a legend isn't just risky, it's perilous. No matter how noble the intent, some things are too foundational, too sacred to completely rewrite. Some fans still hold out hope for a miracle, for that glimmer of unexpected charm that proves everyone wrong. Others have already turned the page, convinced this is just another casualty of corporate tinkering. But the truth is, the fate of Snow White's live-action journey rests on more than one film's reception. It rests on whether Disney and its leading star can rediscover the sincerity that started it all. If they can't, it's not just a movie at stake, it's the legacy of an icon. It's the fragile thread connecting us to that moment long ago, when a little princess in a red bow made audiences believe in magic. And maybe that's the greatest twist of all, that a story once meant to inspire joy and wonder now serves as a warning of how quickly enchantment can vanish when a studio forgets its own heart. If Disney truly wants to bring Snow White into the future, it must return to the very thing it's been running from: the simplicity of hope, the courage of kindness, and the beauty of love. Because in the race to modernize, they risk losing the reason we fell in love with fairy tales to begin with. And when the Evil Queen's mirror finally reflects back at the studio, it might reveal a chilling truth: that even Disney, once the world's greatest dream maker, isn't guaranteed a happy ending.